we gather here today for a very unique and an unusual dialogue. And the idea of this dialogue actually came from Abdullah's practice. When Abdullah and I were talking about the themes and the different ways in which Abdullah's practice unfolds through the different works that you see here, there are some profound ideas about kinship, about decay, about familial bonds and memories, about childhood, but also about nature and ecology, which emerge from Abdullah's practice. If you've taken a walk through the exhibition, you would find that Abdullah works across painting, sculpture, assemblages, and installation. And he is a regular visitor of not only the beach and the forests, but also of the scrapyard. He's reclaiming both naturally found objects and materials, but also materials that have fallen into disuse. And he puts them together, he brings them together into what I think is a final conversation between objects that have lived their life and objects that are about to start living their life. So it's a very interesting venue, a room that we are gathered in today. And on your left, you see the centerpiece of this exhibition, which brings together all these objects. It brings together parts of skeletons of animals, fruit seed, loofahs, banana skin, and several, and you have a coconut. And one of the pieces which I think is something that defines this assemblage is also a fruit that is called the suicide fruit in Kerala. I am told that it has the taste and the texture of mango, but if you have more than the necessary amount of it, you're most likely to die and perish. And this a fascinating relationship of what perishes, where, in what condition, counterpoints the relationship that Abdullah has of love and affection with this material. And it is because of this artistic practice that he had that I am very happy to invite today a very well-known poet and author into a dialogue for this exhibition. On my right is Sumana Roy, who is an author of two works of non-fiction, How I Became a Tree and Provincials, Plant Thinkers of 20th Century Bengal, a work of literary criticism, and also a novel called Missing, a novel, My Mother's Lover and Other Stories, and two collections of poems, Out of Syllabus and VIP. Very important person. Oh, very important plant. I think it's the habit of living in Delhi that I cannot think of the abbreviation VIP as any other, but thank you for bringing a new interpretation to this abbreviation. And just the collection of these publications would tell you that the poet Sumana and the artist Abdullah have several overlaps as they think about kinship and plant ecologies, as they think about reclamation of nature, and also of how bodies become fluid. Human bodies become fluid as they die or get born, and how the nature becomes fluid as it lives in us and through us and with us. And I think it's important to not only think about these themes, but to also demolish the borders between where art ends and where poetry begins. And I'd like to be a champion of demolishing these borders, also because as a curator of this exhibition, I am a theater director myself, and I have entered this space both with respect and with curiosity about Abdullah's practice and about the multidisciplinary ways in which he explores visual art. And I would like to invite Sumana into this curiosity as well with me to not only open up these themes for us today, but also to throw light on how a poet looks at visual art practice and what visual art practice does to poetry itself. Sumana, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Amitesh. Thank you, Abdullah. And thank you to all of you for being here. What I'm going to share with you is a part of it is from work in progress that I have in my head been calling ways of treeing, which is a response to John Berger's ways of seeing. That I think something has happened when this book was published, Ways of Seeing. I was born that year. And I find myself here. I began writing this around the time I was 48 years old. And the difference, Berger was exactly 48 when Ways of Seeing was published. None of this is intentional, as you can guess, but I noticed these coincidences only retrospectively. I want to approach Abdullah's work through something that I experienced during my stay in Dusseldorf about 2 years ago, and use it as an entry point into your work. It is so dark that it seems that morning is a lie, that it's never existed, that it won't ever come. How will it find its way to wherever it starts from? I can't see the tip of my nose. When the first drop of light arrives, it is so meager that it reveals nothing but itself. I want to believe that I am hungrier for light than anyone else anywhere at that moment. But I am aware of my competitors around me. They are soaking and sucking in all that they can, even if it's little, very little. I can't see them, and they have no eyes. But the birds sit on their silhouettes. I think this is why the tree looks like a natural home to such a variety of species in a way the four-walled house doesn't. I think of one of the first Bangla poems I had to commit to memory, whose title I have to struggle to remember, even though I know the poem. It's 8 lines by heart. So the poem is by Rajanikanto Sen, and I won't bore you with, by reading the 8 lines. It begins, Babui pakhire daki boliche chorai, kure ghore theke koro shilper borai. So the weaver bird and the sparrow bird are having a conversation. It is turning into a fight of one-upmanship. The sparrow taunts the weaver bird. You live in a thatched hut, but boast about art. I live in comfort and happiness in mansions. You suffer in the sun and the storm. The weaver bird smiles. There's no doubt about that. I suffer, but I still live in my own house. Yours might be a pakka house and mine kacha, but I built it myself, and so it is beautiful to me. The title of the poem is slightly moralistic, Shadhinotar Shuk, the joy of freedom or independence. What I remember from it, though, is the architecture of the 2 houses. I think the sukh, the joy or happiness, is not in ownership as much as it is in the architecture of the house itself. The weaver bird's nest, soft branches delicately woven into a design that no man-made structure can compare to it. When I was very little, my grandmother once pointed to a house across the river, a side of their village we rarely visited, and said, Kakpokhio ashe na oi barite. Not even a crow or bird comes to that house. In the idiom, which I didn't quite understand then, is hidden the idea of unfriendliness. Such is the air of hostility that no bird visits that house. Perhaps because children can take everything literally, that sense has stayed in my being. That birds will only make homes of houses that can accommodate their bodies and their ambition. The sky is not home, but the tree is. That is a conundrum that I have struggled to understand. Why the places where we seem to feel the freest are not necessarily our homes. Why resting places after the voltage of freedom become our home. Why the architecture of our houses need not accommodate our wingspan, but our beings before and after flight. A magpie moves around on the patio. Another joins it. A little later, another, until I can't tell which was the first one. They perch on the railing, the straightness of whose iron grill runs in the opposite direction to the floors. The wooden rails supine and stitched together like an army of planks whose destiny it has become to be suddenly bound together. A few meters away are the trees. I don't know their names. They are tall. It is autumn. The leaves fall all day until it begins to seem that this is how it has always been. The birds move between the trees and the patio. I will never be able to see their nests. I begin to imagine it, and the first thought from my visual conditioning is to imagine a round shape, twigs arranged into a basket. What is a home? Anything that can hold a few eggs, the next generation of the species? If that is the economy behind a bird's sense of architecture or broken paths loaned from trees, how is human architecture different? The bird replicates the design of the tree, the intimacy and distance of its branches in building its nest. Not only must the nest resemble the tree, even if only in synecdoche, it must feel like it too. Abdullah's exhibition is called The Embrace of Ruins. Note the R in the title. Ruins of an Embrace, sorry. So you had to correct me. Note the R. R. Ruins, embrace. There's something about its sound on our tongue. When you say R, notice how the tongue rolls back on itself, and hence the first and terminal sounds in a word such as river. R, I-V-E-R. R and R, not R. River, it's meant to roll on endlessly. How then can it be the sound of a word such as ruin or rust, whose biography owes to a history of standing, of waiting without movement? There's another R in the middle, in embrace, the word on the other side of the preposition, waiting. The R makes the embrace smoother, facilitates its liquidity, takes away its friction. Whom do we embrace? A few four-letter things, love, life, and similar things, but only the familiar with its R at the end, or also the stranger with its first R almost where the R in embrace is, stranger, embrace, and another at the end, making its edges less sharp. Abdullah embraces the familiar. And what is the familiar? Let's look at the root word, family. A family that he's created from remembrance. Remember. Remember, two R's at the beginning and end, like river, a stream. There's also the word member hidden in it. Remember, member. like members of a family. Embrace, remember, member. Of course, there's nothing more intimate than memories, more intimate than skin and blood and muscle, something beyond touch. How is an artist to create this language of intimacy, something essentially unshareable? Orhan Pamuk, for instance, created what he called a museum of innocence. Abdullah creates a museum of experience. Yes, I couldn't resist the Blakean binary. What is the unit of memory? We know that it's certainly not these many gigabytes. Then, what is its alphabet? What are the letters of this alphabet? You'd have noticed this wall where Abdullah tries to present such an alphabet, one with many letters. Abdullah, what are the vowels and consonants in this alphabet? These different objects and their different shapes, what do they have in common except the embrace of remembering, of membering? These are found objects, just as the things that are returned to us by our memory are found objects. They have returned slightly changed from the event itself, like the objects picked up from the roadside become something more when its context and form are changed slightly, often without volition. Do these found objects have a memory of what they were once? In an older life, epoxy resin and auto paint have become flowers in Abdullah's cosmology. Do they remember their previous life? Perhaps they want to leave their toxic, literally toxic life behind them. You must have noticed how the gradient of Abdullah's bricolage mind wants to transform the remainders of a very contingent world into something that temporarily rehabilitates our relationship with the natural world. That rice grain in that room, that rice grain can be created out of copper, or tree trunks can hold syringes. That makes Abdullah part of a lineage that goes back to the European modernists, sure. But I think his work is actually in the tradition of Abanindranath Tagore, who, collecting branches and wood, driftwood, from the forests around Shantiniketan, placed them in a way that they resembled the face or bodies of animals. He called his practice Katum Kutum. Kutum is the Bangla word for relative. And Abanindranath was trying to create relatives out of these pieces of found wood, an animal kingdom, as it were. Abdullah is creating relatives as well, a family out of rust and remainder, both of which are a reminder that we are formed of the everyday, of what is it at hand rather than what is desired. Desire is metallic, it rusts, but families form through these ad hoc relations as well. That is also how we are here, a family temporarily, Abdullah, Amitesh, and I. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumana, for that very, very extremely evocative and poetic response to not only Abdullah's work, but also bringing in so many references from history, from our pasts, and also from poetry itself. I was struck by several things that you mentioned. I'm going to start with one of the very last things that you brought us back to, which is the resonance of Abdullah's work in Abanindranath's work as well. And the work that you mentioned is called Katum Kutum. And just the sound, the phonetics of it, brings me back to Abdullah's work, which is also called Chutum. And it's not only a resonance of material and of intent, but also of language between Bengal and Kerala, uh, which, as regions and as states, have an unusual location in our country today. So, serendipity, fortune. It's interesting how these practices of the past, the ghosts of the past, somehow get revealed in contemporary work around us as well. And I will let Abdullah talk a little bit more about Chutum, but one other thing that I was struck by was a some kind of a visual asymmetry between the letters on your page and the artwork that we are surrounded by here. So, black letters, vowels, and consonants on a page without shadows make it seem like as if language has been flattened out to be read and to be heard. But we are also surrounded by a work in which, as you likened this work to language, to vowels and consonants, but these letters, these consonants and vowels seem to have shadows. And in that sense, like language, reveal something underneath, reveal a past and a present, reveal that is not said. Um, and that is also something that I would like Abdullah to respond to, both the title and how it carries a ghost of the past from another region, from another artist's practice, but also of this work being likened to language that is sticking out and being revealed as much as in its shadows as it is in its presence of objects.
Hi, everybody. Actually, they are also talking about the language, the alphabets. Like every single objects have its own alphabets. You are relating to that also. I'm just you are talking about how the shadows is. I am interpreting, right? Like uh, um, I just. I think the shadows have its own. This particular work, I didn't want to see the object actually. I really want to focus on the shadows because if you see a shadow, I think the shadow is replicating the soul or something. Like if you see your shadows like in that place, I think it's feel like your soul, or like it's getting bigger, it's like in smaller in nights particularly. In That's how I just thought to how can I bring this particular thing soul, how can I reflect the soul into it, like that's how the then I just thought, okay, I just want to show the shadow, then the soul will, then the shadows also it's interconnected. That's how the, if you look the nature closer, I think in our surrounding it's very interconnected. They are very, like one thing is like if we something decay, another, it become their food, I think that is also a play in between, and that's how I just think about the shadow. Yeah.
And uh, it's interesting that you found a new home and a new family. If Shumana spoke about the three of us as a temporary family this evening, but we're also surrounded by a family of objects. And this is a family that you have created in this artwork. We wouldn't find these materials next to each other, close to each other, in the way in which you have installed them and brought them. And when one, and I mean, this is a recurring theme that you come back to. Not only a family of objects, but also a family of materials, and also your own family. A series of portraits that you do, which are right at the end of the corridor, installed at the end of the corridor in this exhibition. I'm quite struck by the moments that you have captured. They are moments of domestic labor, of boredom, of illness, of old age, of fragility, of decay. There are young bodies, there are children in that work, but they somehow remind us of the, the brutality of time and of gazes that are lost in a moment. I was wondering what is the process of choosing these moments that you bring in your practice of portraiture?
Yeah, particularly, I think why I'm taking the kids and the grandfathers, grandmothers also. I also like in between space. I don't like it. I think that age. I think whenever we are kid, I think that is very fascinated me in that my period also, because I think I don't have the barriers in my childhood. I'm like totally free, and I know how I am thinking, how I'm just imagining things, how I have no interpretations or no like insecurities about that. I'm just thinking like I just do something like I will go. I think that freedom it's I always missing nowadays. That freedom to go other home and like that kind of freedom I just really missing. And I think the grandfathers, back to grandfathers and all, I think I really interested to listen stories. The stories from them, it's very interesting. Why? Why? Because I think they have very interesting stories because it's related to our family itself. The story they are saying it's family, where our family came from, how we are survive this much. How was our older times, the difficulties and all. I think that then we will imagine the terrain, how the terrain was like, how the place was like. Then we will, I think, if also we also think, if you also taking the object and thinking back, or what was his this history, or how long it came from, like that, both the things are the same. I think the same intention to know the how was it, like how is this their growth, like. I think that two things came out to different practices. A painting is totally a different practice. This is also a different practice. But I think the core idea came out the similar. I think that's how the selection of the people. I think I don't like in between. I just like kid and older people.
It's I mean, this is my experience of also knowing more about Abdullah and his practice. That he does go back to childhood memories as much as he's fascinated by the processes of preservation, of not only of bodies that are aging, but of stories in his family as well. You mentioned freedom. You also mentioned freedom. But both of you mentioned freedom in with very different undertones. And I want to kind of open up this idea of freedom and the juxtaposition of this word with home that you mentioned, Sumana. We see a lot of home in Abdullah's practice as well, but you're looking at the contrast, the stark contrast between the two in a very interesting way, where you said that spaces of freedom, jazz is very freeing, yes. Why aren't we in the party? Isn't this song also about freedom? Someone else's freedom is not our freedom. I I'm going to remember this evening that has brought in the joy of exploring freedom and also accidents. Um, and so you mentioned freedom and you mentioned spaces of freedom, which somehow never end up becoming home. And the spaces that we call home are necessarily spaces that do not are not able to accommodate our wings, our individual freedoms or collective freedoms. And this tension actually introduces a very new, unusual kind of torque between the two ideas. There is a sense of home that, for example, stories give us. And Susan Sontag talks about why we tell stories. And she would say that telling a story or a story itself is a kind of shelter, is a kind of home, is a kind of refuge. And this is exactly why we tell stories to our children. And as children, we hear stories. And within those stories, we find home, but also that we find freedom in those stories. Some of the stories are freeing also in a sense that we will never be able to live them, but in the act of hearing them, listening to them, and imagining them, it brings to us an experience of freedom that we will never end up actually experiencing in life. And my question to you is that how do you look at a story as an author and a poet? Is the act of telling a story or listening to a story an act of freeing oneself? Or is it a refuge and a home and a confining one? And you would still go on to look for freedom in non stories?
Uh, Amitesh, you said that we, s- we seek entertainment, for instance, a cheap bazari word to use, through stories. But I think all of us will agree that we also seek freedom from stories as well. We don't realize it consciously, perhaps, but because every space produces its own story, so home has its own narrative, there we feel compelled to take a holiday, and the place we go to, because we want some kind of continuity, we use the phrase holiday home. It's a very Indian English phrase, for instance. We want to hold on to the idea of home, but we also want freedom from the idea of home. And so it's holiday. It's a holiday home. And which is very different from this particular construction, which are very phonetically similar. Hotel, hostel, hospital, they're very similar. That's another train of thought altogether. At some point of time, we would want freedom, but these are also home-giving spaces. They restore us in some way, restore us to, at least we imagine some older version of ourselves, home, hostel, hospital. But we seek desperate freedom from them. No matter if we're staying at the Taj, even then we would want to be free of the Taj at some point of time. And hence the relief and joy when we return home after a holiday. Too much of freedom is a terrible thing. It is so terrible that we can't imagine it. So, if I were to ask you or you were to ask me, what is your ultimate idea of freedom? I'm sure all of us would strain to kind of come up not just with a literal answer, even with a metaphorical or an idiomatic answer. I'll take about your question about the story. I like all kinds of stories. I find imprisoned by the idea of narrative that things must happen in a way where some meaning should be produced. I know from my life, as I imagine you do from yours, that basically it is meaning hyphen less, not meaningless, not the casual way we think of it as our lives being meaningless, but that it is without meaning. What meaning does it have that you woke up in the morning, brushed your teeth, had your lunch, and came here? It is outside narrative. But because of being conditioned by commerce, by a mix of capitalism and a certain kind of storytelling being privileged, we have become conditioned to recognizing or praising or admiring or seeking only one kind of story. We will notice, because you mentioned children, the best thing, I have a nephew and niece, and Amitesh has two very young children. And you would know from your experience with children that anything is a story for children. So my niece will ask me, "Did you punish your students in class?" She can't imagine a university student. She's very thrilled at the idea that her aunt can punish some students, something she, I think, would very much enjoy. And if I say, "Huh, what kind of punishment?" And she's interested in the details of that punishment. I said, "Go out, go and get me a glass of water." And she couldn't get water for you. So it is absolutely outside meaning. The reason we call them bedtime stories is because these stories are, let us put it, a word that Amitesh used, they're very boring. They are so boring that they must put these children to sleep. If they are very excited, they would be asking, to go back to what E.M. Foster said, that a novel has to be a page turner. And remember, the word is a physical one. That I know what is happening, I want to know what is happening in the next page, so I turn the page. And the page turner, as all of us know here, becomes a commercial category. Think then of filmmakers, and I see and think of filmmakers like Manikal. Think of a film like Uski Roti. What is happening? What is the story there? I remember watching it on Doordarshan, and I'm very old, so I was watching it before satellite television came to India. And I remember my English professor asking me, "What did you do on Sunday?" "Sir, I watched a film." "What film? Did we watch the same film?" And at that time in India, all of us watched the same film every Sunday. And I said, "Did you like it?" "Sir, I was very bored." And he said, "Very good. Manikal has succeeded." And I thought, I'm 17 or 18 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, what kind of an idiot professor is this? That, he's teaching me literature and he's praising boredom. Uski Roti, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is about a woman, Uski, his roti. She's making rotis for a truck driver husband who stops on the way and picks up these rotis. So all through the film, we experience the boredom of this woman making rotis. And this is what my professor said, this is what Manikal wanted you to feel, almost, vicariously, that if the woman is so bored, you must feel the woman's boredom of making the rotis. I understand now that this is a very mimetic way of interpreting this, and there is much more to Manikal than that. But there are spaces outside this very commercial idea of a story. Amitesh, for example, if you were to write a book, that is just talking about his experiences as an artist, as a teacher, his work in theater, in art, and so on. And these are all as a parent, as a partner. And these are all, there is nothing that connects them. So these could be these loose sheets of paper, and it becomes imperative on us to bring our own kinds of thread, to stitch something out of it. Amitesh refuses to give us a story. He gives us snippets. And the commercial publisher, Amitesh would struggle in spite of being a famous, playwright and, a theater director, would struggle to find a mainstream publisher because the mainstream publisher would say, but where's the story? So, there's only one kind of story. So I think when Abdullah means story, it's not this commercial idea of story that is being told to us. A poem is also a story. It's a very short lived story, a short lived moment, or short lived experience of a moment.
You mentioned the fascination of children with stories, not just that bedtime story. I think my children, um both of them dislike the idea of bedtime stories, not only because they're boring, but also because they end. And every time a bedtime story ends, my son asks me, "So what happened after?" And there is a need that with stories comes a relationship with the world, and that relationship is an unending relationship. And if that does not end, why does a story end? Um, and so it becomes, so either we go back to the start of the story and read it again, or we pick up another book, and which is why perhaps sequels like Harry Potter has sequels are interesting bedtime stories, because we can move from one book to another, to the third, to the fourth, till they actually fall asleep. And I find that I have the same instinct as a storyteller. And my question to you also comes from this, which is that as a storyteller and as also an archivist of stories, my nightmare is that these will end one day, that stories will end one day, that I will not have more stories to collect. Thankfully, we live in a world in which this may never happen, and telling stories today and finding stories today is an act of rebellion. Stories that are not being told must be told. But as an archivist of stories, do you also have this fear that you have been told stories? A, do you trust them fully?
Okay.
And B, do you hear the same story in another version from someone else in the family, which has been my experience, that somehow as a family we never come to a consensus of a story of the family, that there are several stories and many of them are contradictory to each other.
Of course.
And it is in that contradiction that the family space survives, that the family space blossoms, you know. And so, do you have the same experience as an archivist of stories, or
Yeah. I'm also thinking like I'm not only concentrated on the stories, actually it's on the time also. While we are collecting that is also archived or that is also documented. Actually, this if I'm collecting the things, I'm also have a like coordinates. I'll also try to make a coordinates where taking this particular object. I think that collection, like the space and time, I think those kind of things also documented. So that's how the story still stay there only. Like I think it will not finish. The story will stay like there only. Like we don't want to. I think.
I'm fascinated by your series, the Butterfly series that you
Yeah.
have, where you say that you collect these butterflies um, at night,
Yeah.
and then you not only um, care, you sort of perform an act of care in bringing butterflies in your practice, but also that you reproduce the night in the material as well. Can you speak a little bit about that particular series of work that you're developing?
The butterfly one, that is also the time and the moment, the place also, where I'm going that particular place. I also, not daily, but random days. Mostly I'll be there at night. I think I'm also at that time, like, be there like at the night time, because in the corner of my house, I just out my studio, and I just go to the home for taking the food and all. At that time only I'm seeing this. Then how I connected this thing, I think, I want to document the time. Maybe that's how I just connected. I just photograph or take the darkness, the night, how much dark it is. Like, I just grab the color of the sky. I think, why I did it because of that. I just want to document that two things. Yeah.
May I just add to? So, because you're talking about the story,
Yeah.
I think this is a story,
Yeah.
and it's a lovely one.
Uh-huh.
Um, but we don't know from where it begins.
Mm-hmm.
For each of us,
Mm-hmm.
so when Amitesh was introducing this to me, and I said, we were standing there, and I said, that's a coconut, right? And he said, yes. And then he told me about the suicide fruit. I think for all of us, it would begin from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Just as that series of 7 panels that you have on the butterfly, it's possible that because of the self that is, or the ordering self that is at work, you and Amitesh have put this in a certain sequence. Tomorrow, if you were to arrange this, because the self that goes to sleep is not the same self that wakes up, it is possible that you would order it differently. It would be the same story but also different,
Yeah.
in the sense that when we were talking about freedom, freedom is related to the idea of the story, because I think we need to give more freedom to the reader, to the audience, to the viewer, to interpret this and to create their own narrative for that particular moment. When they come back the next day, as I'm sure many will, if I lived in Delhi, I would have come back for this. My story would begin from a different place. Why the family is so important, I'll go back to my Bengali, origin, or my life in the Bangla language. The word for relative is attiyo. It derives from the word Atma, which is the word you used when Amitesh asked you to explain the shadows.
Yeah.
So, you can be my Attiya, my relative, not because you're related to me by blood, but because your soul is related to me. I somehow feel this word more beautiful than soulmates, which is like an Archie's card kind of word. So, the fact that these are all related to each other, even though they might not be touching each other, their shadows are grazing on each other.
Yeah.
And they become connected to each other by a kind of lineage that is almost blood like. They share something. What is the common thing between all these different things? It is the ordering and fashioning self. Your DNA is there. That is why it makes this a story. And that I find very beautiful.
And sometimes the reordering happens by accident, and so I want to return to an accident in how you mentioned the title of this exhibition, because it does make a very different kind of a meaning and an equally beautiful one. If we read the title the other way around, which is Embrace of a Ruin. And it's only after you mentioned it is when I started to wonder why the reverse of it didn't occur to me as we were thinking about the title and playing around with the idea of what an embrace and what a ruin is. We right now are in a city of ruins, in a sense. Delhi has been a capital 7 times over, and it has been known to be a city of ruins in the not only in the political sense and in a social sense, but also in the sense of architecture and spaces and dreams. The dreams of several emperors and empires have collapsed here and have become ruins. And we also today sit in one such colonial building in which this exhibition is presented. And this relationship of the ruins to an artistic practice, to an exhibition, but also to an embrace, to something that holds you. So I just want to ask you to think a little bit about the reverse of the title, which is the embrace of a ruin, which has in itself a ghostly appearance, which has in itself lost voices and sounds, which only are heard by a listener who's intent and keen on listening to them. Does an embrace of a ruin fascinate you? And does it appear in your writing in any way?
You know, Amitesh, when you said we are sitting in a city of ruins, and somehow because I have this problem with mishearing, I thought, yeah, that's true. We all are cities of ruins individually. I am a ruin in a way, all of us are. I mean, I am alive also because of what I was, which is not the same. How do I say it? It's almost I'm making it sound like a mathematical thing. Something on this side of is equal to, and something on the other side. When I embrace someone or something, I am embracing an incomplete thing. And that I find beautiful. I find the idea, as you said, Amitesh, when you said that story's end, that terrifies you. I think it's because you hate completeness and completion so much. I am terrified of the idea of completeness. This neoclassical bug that has taken over Indian architectural spaces now, the Chota Bhimification of India's airports and railway stations and all these, where we have to see everything. Look at Abdullah. Why did I make this journey from Sonipat to come here? Not only because I can't say no to Amitesh, whom I like very much, but because a friend of mine who's an art critic, Kunal Ray, said, and he said, I told him, Kunal, I don't like doing these things. And he said, but it's Abdullah, you will love his work. And I said, how do you know? And he explained to me, this is the synecdoche. It is a part for the whole. My creative practice, my life's vision is that no, life is not reality television. It's not a camera following you or your loved one around for 24/7, 365 multiplied by how many years we are together. But that the moment of union is also very short-lived. Sambhoga. But Biraha is also as beautiful. Yeah, so I think of ruins as Viraha. I said Biraha, I'm Bengali. I struggle to say V. So the embrace of ruins, every time we embrace something, particularly if we embrace a human, or an idea or language, we are never embracing them in their entirety, but their wispiness in something that was. And that is why we construct and reconstruct people in our heads and our hearts continuously. The shadow, which is what you are working with, I think if anyone were to ask me what is Abdullah's medium, I would say the shadow, because it is so difficult and so idiosyncratic. You are dependent on a light source, but you can also control so much, but only so much. How much, for me, that is analogical to how much you can control another person's heart. For God's sake, we can't control our own heart. How can we control someone else's? Our heart is always in ruins. And I think that the fact that we are able to acknowledge that our lives are fragments, that we will never know the whole. Fortunately, we will never know the end, and so Amitesh doesn't have to be terrified. It's a beautiful thing for me that to be a. So people often ask me about what have you championed. I champion incompletion. I love that aesthetic. If you tell me everything, you've bored me. Life and people are not, even a matrimonial column doesn't tell you everything. Something as boring as a matrimonial column. So, that is my idea of ruins. It is not something that exists whose DNA is in subtraction, which is how we conventionally see ruins. Something has been taken away and the remainder is still there. For me, it is generative. We give much more to the ruins than we give to, a CPWD building, for instance.
And I can't help but notice in this work that there is not only a sense of infinite expansion, that this is perhaps the most expansive iteration of the work that you have produced, but also that it is counterpointed by a single material which is on the third wall, right behind everyone. There is a single material which stands there, which, in a sense, maybe is also looking at the cluster and the family that you have produced, but is also in some ways a metaphorical presence of perhaps the artist and the poet who remove themselves from society while talking about what it is. And this brings me to my very last provocation for today, to both of you, in fact, is that as you collect materials from the scrapyard and from the beach and from the forests, and you bring them into your studio as much as you do stories, how do you see yourself as an artist in the contemporary moment that we live in today?
That's a good question. Uh, I'm believing if you are going to your core, your core, wha- I'm not thinking about at that time, like while collecting and all. It's not about I'm just started because I'm an artist. I'm an artist. Not a, I just completed my degree or after that I'm collecting. I'm not like that happened actually. In my childhood itself, I've started that. That's how I'm not thinking about the contemporary like I want to place myself here. I'm not thinking about that. I truly believing I've just went back and what all are thinking in my child. And as a kid, I'm what I want to do. That what I'm doing right now. I think that's how. I think if you say the core of yourself, it will reflect what now what is happening. it will reflect, or it will say a big dialogue, or it will make a statement on it, we don't want to intentionally do anything, it will come as it is. Like, I think that's I didn't, actually I still believe, I'm coming from a very, like a family, it's like very orthodox. They didn't know what I'm doing right now, and my parents didn't know what I'm doing. you know like that then like that's how sometimes I'm also doubt myself, it's I am an artist or not, like really I'm not, like actually I getting that idea from audience, or my friends, or my, they are saying to me, you are like, oh, that particular things makes more interesting. Then only I'm thinking, okay, I'm like, I think, yeah, I'm not worried about those particular things. Yeah.
Do you ever doubt that you're a poet?
All the time. Should I read out my text messages to my closest friend from the car? So, this was what I wrote to him. I'm never sure, my phone is over there, otherwise, I would read it. I'm never sure whether I would be able to write a poem ever again. So, uh, he wrote in uppercase, why? Many question marks. No, not one, only one question mark, sorry, why? And I said, so if I promise to write an essay for someone, I can make this promise tentatively, knowing that I'll be able to keep this promise. That, something or the other about the form of the essay will emerge out of me. But I'm never sure about a poem. Even after it has been published, I'm shy, I'm tentative, I'm underconfident, because one is never sure whether it is working. And I remember, it's not just a poem, Amitesh. I remember reading from my first book, How I Became a Tree, in front of an audience in America where my editor was sitting. And I didn't know she had a copy of my book in her hand. And as I was reading, I was changing the sentences. I was so embarrassed of what I had written 9 years ago. And no one in the audience knew. And she said, as I came down, she said, her name is Jennifer Banks. She said, I saw what you did there, Sumana. And I was like, but there's something, so when the proofs come, you're always unhappy. Something needs to be changed. Even after it is over, I loved what Abdullah said. This is not really related, a response to this, but what Abdullah said, that he creates what he's doing because he cannot help it. It is not because it's trending. I saw these words, biomimetic and, biomorphism, some of these.
Biomimicry and
Yes.
biomorphism.
Yes. And I thought, that can't be the only way to kind of, I thought that, I must say this, we find ourselves being forced to use these tag words just to create some kind of space, hoping once we find this space, jo karna hai kar lenge. We feel compelled, but the resistance is in us if one is an artist. I will do things that are not trending. I refuse to write about certain things, even though it's very sexy to write about those things, because it'll get you into the front page of a newspaper. Just as books become important immediately after they are banned, before that no one cares to read them. But similarly, I used to run a magazine called, an online magazine called Anti-Serious. And we used to have a section called Not Trending. Because I just hate this idea. I hate the idea of what I write being categorized as environmental humanities or things. You will also find yourself appropriated in that way. The whole idea is to resist, because as you said, at the age of 9, you did not know this word. We should not know this even if we live till 90. I'll invoke one Bengali writer, a Bangladeshi writer. Bengalis and Bangladeshis are conflated where we are. Humayun Ahmed. He said, all the stories we will ever tell come to us by the time we are 9 years old. After that, it's only, going back to that archive. I was thinking of that too when you were speaking, Abdullah.
Thank you so much, Abdullah and Shumana. Here's to more doubt and more resistance, and hopefully finding newer stories even after you're 9 years old. Thank you, everyone, for having joined us today evening. And I'm really, really, really grateful, Shumana, that you trekked all the way from Sonipat to come and join us today, and also to bring so many exciting perspectives to this exhibition and also to Abdullah's work. Thank you so much.